welcome to this edition of the Lean Celebrity Interview here at Cal Poly. And I am just fortunate once again to have one of my favorite Lean people, Beau Keyte, is here to be our interviewer today. Beau has done this. I don't know, Beau. This probably is we're not. I don't know if we're in double digits yet, but we're approaching.
Probably not. We're approaching. Yeah,
we're approaching, but. Beau has been in the lean business longer than I have. He started when he was just a baby, I think. And but he's been doing lean for over 30 years at this point. He's written a couple of books. He's one of the more knowledgeable, thoughtful people in this area, and I always enjoy an opportunity to talk to him. Also, Beau has been out to the Central Coast here many times. He's a wine appreciator, just like myself. So we have that in common also. So Beau, thanks for being here and welcome.
Thank you. And for those of you who can't see the obvious, to be really good at this, you need to like wine, be bald, wear glasses, and have a white beard. And then you'll be very, very successful.
Yeah, there you are. Hey Beau, I know we sort of have this sort of regular plan of questions that we ask, but we conferred a little bit before this, and I know you're working on a really sort of interesting problem that sort of came up during the this recent sort of COVID crisis that we had as a country, and you were doing some work in identifying some problems with our strategic national stockpile, and the students were just talking about problems, in a sort of a very contained way, but you're kind of taking this large and so looking at a pretty big problem. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about sort of what you've been looking at and how you're doing this?
Yeah. So I started getting very concerned early in 2020 when all anybody could do was watch the TV in the kitchen because everyone was stuck at home, in terms of what was really happening with all the masks. And if you remember anything about that, people couldn't find masks and people were dying because of it. So they started mentioning the stockpile, and I didn't have anything else to do. So I started doing a lot of work and trying to understand the stockpile, and then what was broken inside the stockpile that they couldn't support the healthcare systems with masks or other PPE. Ventilators, they talked a lot about ventilators being broken and masks being non-existent. So that's just a thumbnail sketch of why I went down this rabbit hole. And in the process, I learned a great deal, probably more than any other non-government official, about what's going on, how it works, how it didn't work, and I proposed a solution. So it was published in Market Watch, and I've since had a couple of opportunities to talk about it on stage.
So Beau, I think that's interesting. And these guys here in this class, they're just starting to learn about lean and just starting on their lean journeys. You effectively took, your 30 plus years of lean learning and sort of you're sitting back and looking at this problem. So what was it about your sort of knowledge or capability in lean that made you particularly able to sort of analyze this problem, or what was the lean skills or capabilities?
Yeah. So first thing was recognizing a system that's broken. So it's not the fact that we didn't pack out a pallet fast enough. It's a fact that several elements of a major global supply chain failed. So one of the things I worry about is what's the system we're looking at, not what's this narrow little thing here, but what's going on around, because what's going on around impacts every single step inside a process. So that was the first thing. And the second thing was literally just problem solving, just digging down and finding data. You can't do anything without data. And it took me a really, really long time because a lot of data is public, but you have to find it and then make sense out of it, because a lot of times it's just numbers and no facts.
So was it like, so the students are starting on to their measure phase. So we get sort of there's that sort of macro or higher level sort of measure, right? Like, how many masks can't you find, or I'm not exactly sure how to do that. But then the data, what you talk about, actually kind of goes into sort of deeper measures or looking at the actual, input level or the connecting data, sort of inside the system.
Yeah, so there, I could only go so far with publicly available data. I was able to talk to people at the CDC, and they pointed me to public data, but wouldn't share non-public data. So that was helpful because I could find some data to start to make a story. But I know there's several things behind the scenes that I couldn't find. There was also a congressional hearing that's on C-SPAN that I watched that helped me and kind of blew me away on the lack of PPE and ventilators. So I found ways to get information to look at high-level gaps. These are not process level gaps. These are system level gaps, because that's the only look I had was what's happening in the system, not what's happening like 2 levels deep inside each one of the organizations of the system. I didn't have any access to that.
Right. So do you think, I don't want to jump to solutions, but it is, we've kind of been discussing like how understanding the problem is, 80% of your way to the solution and things. Like what is it that you saw, or how are you sort of perceiving the problem at this point?
Yeah, well, so I'm checking the clock.
No, that's okay. We'll watch the clock for you, Beau.
And I do have some slides I can share. It'd probably take 15 minutes.
Okay.
Is that too much?
I think that's just about as much time as we have. Yeah. So if we can get
Okay,
there,
and then I'll open up for questions.
Yeah.
So let me see if I can do this.
Okay.
This is the first time I've done it this fast. So let's see what I can do here.
Buckle up, everyone. It's about to happen.
If I can find it, I can't find it. Oh, I don't know where it is.
There you go.
Here we go. So there's a lot around this, but I'm going to make it very quick and short for you guys and talk about the failure of the stockpile. It failed in its mission to protect Americans during a pandemic, and it failed to, let me go in presentation mode. I couldn't do that until I got here.
Okay.
And it failed to learn from its mistakes. And this is one of the biggest things that you could take away from Professor Olsen's course is it's okay to make mistakes as long as you learn and improve from it. And the government has not learned and is not improving anything, which means during the next pandemic, if we choose to believe it's a pandemic, that's another issue, we're going to be the same problem. We're going to have exactly the same problem all over again because they haven't done anything to resolve the root causes. So that's basically what's going on. So let's talk about the stockpile for just a minute. It reports to a department called Health and Human Services. Its mission is to supplement state and local supplies during public health emergencies. Here's kind of a funky way of looking at it, where they have a lot of different people, 260 people, I think, are in this organization. And they're really smart people. They do lots of stuff. Look at all the things in the triangles. They really do a lot to try to understand what's going on. And then the blue shows the flow of materials. So that's basically what it is. And how is it supposed to save lives? Well, we have suppliers that are all in China, and they ship by boat to the stockpile. It has several locations, and that's the inventory sits there until it's needed, and that's an emergency, which triggers a response. They load the PPP on trucks, and they get into the hospital and healthcare systems in about 2 days. That's how it's supposed to work. So in that, we have to test for capability. And the CDC tested that. I also call it the SNS as part. I'm sorry, SNS, Strategic National Stockpile, tested its capability by simulating, because they didn't have a national emergency to go for. And so they simulated and modeled it. And in attendance for all these things, whenever they modeled, they got a bunch of departments together, federal agencies, to talk about the results. Unfortunately, big question is who wasn't there, which is another lean point. The rest of the supply chain was not there. No one else was included. They had no input. They just had government federal agencies talking amongst themselves and not worrying about anything else on either side of them. That is really a recipe for failure, regardless of how good the system is, because they aren't including people who have to live and operate inside the system.
And Bo, that's, you know, that is so key in the kinds of things that the students are doing with their projects, right? If they go into their dorm room or their apartment room and sit down and try to knock out their mini project and come up with a solution, they kind of wind up with the same thing that the Strategic National Stockpile people did, right? They need to be out there talking to the people doing the work. Right?
You have to get involved. You have to know what the system is, where it stops and where it stops, and get everybody, it starts and stops, and get everybody involved. That's key to each of your projects. Whatever scope you have, there's a beginning and end. Include the people inside that scope. So then we looked at the inventory. I don't know how much you guys read about this. It was in shambles. 3 years before the pandemic, there was an audit of the inventory. 100% of the masks were expired and ventilators were broken. And early in the pandemic, there was an estimation of a need for 300 million masks in inventory, and they had 5 million expired ones. So there's a problem in inventory.
You know, boy, whenever I sort of see that, I always sort of think to the, you know, my kitchen drawer with the little pile of rubber bands, you know, so some of those rubber bands are 2 or 3 years old. They're not really good or useful for anything, right?
No, the fabric on the mask will last until the earth burns up, but the rubber doesn't last very long. So the mask would fall off your face. That's why they're expired. Yeah. Also, we saw a bunch of things going on. This is highly simplified here. The prices, if you could find them, were up 10 times, and every organization is competing for the same inventory. They're going for the same mask available on some website. So it was really bad. What we didn't know was that they were estimated later, the economic cost was $16 trillion. I presented this in May of this year. And ever since then, I've heard about other costs. I mean, the cost of the school children will never be measured. The lost learning will never be measured. It's way beyond this, all because we didn't have a good system in part to keep us safer. Mm-hmm. So this is what really bothered me. I decided to find out how bad it really was. And when I presented this, we just hit 1 million deaths. Now, why is 1 million deaths important? Well, war was declared by the president on March 18th. So we're at war. So let's review historical casualties in war. And here you have the top 10 of the, I think it's 72 wars we've been in since we were a nation. I never knew that. We have some really little wars, but their war was declared. And what we see here is if you add up all the wars America's been in, it doesn't even come close to what we had in COVID. Once again, this is not all about PPE. My understanding is a quarter of that was the lack of vaccinations, but still PPE was a major portion within the rest of the 3 quarters there. Was still access to safe clothing and measures. So that's what I wanted to fix. This is the symptom of a broken system, not the root cause, it's the symptom.
You know, I know this is something different, Bo, but you know, this also looks a little bit like sort of a Pareto chart. You know, if I was looking at the country and what kind of things do I need to worry about? Do I worry about wars or do I worry about pandemics? I would maybe be worrying about pandemics, right?
Much more. So people don't understand this. So I feel bad that people don't understand it, and I feel, well, I have lots of feelings, so I don't want to spend time here. We have a problem, and this is going to happen again if we don't fix the system, regardless of whether or not we want to be vaccinated. So it'll be 750 instead of 1 million, big deal. It's still a lot of people that can die until we start addressing the system. So the ultimate insult to me as a lean geek is nobody learned. I said that before. Peter Navarro was a guy who was bouncing around that White House at the time. Somebody asked him, what are you going to do about the SNS? He said, build up inventory. If you have 5 million parts that are bad, 200 million parts or 300 million parts are going to be bad too. You haven't figured out how to run a warehouse. So it's clearly not understanding the system. Congressional testimonies were terrible. Everyone was pointing fingers. Yeah. And more recently, I thought there was a chance of a bill coming in to help. I've done research in the last 3 weeks. The bill died. That no one is doing anything legislatively to address this, and it's going to happen again.
Yeah.
So that's my real hurt. So I want to talk about the gaps, and then I'll get off. No, I won't get off. I'm going to show you a potential model. Stakeholders out of the loop. That's a gap in performance.
Yeah.
7,000-mile supply chain. Everything's coming from China. Oh, by the way, we don't like China. So how's that going? Not enough inventory. It is outdated. Ineffective capability, that they can't test the capability effectively, and there's no learning. So these are the gaps that I tried to deal with and try to address. And here's what the countermeasures are. Then I'll show you a graphic. I think I have time. First countermeasure, bring in everybody. Let's have a coalition of the suppliers, the truckers, the government, everybody that are allowed to think and make decisions on this broken model. Let's bring home some domestic production. It's not working out with China one way or another. I have nothing against it per se, but it's not working. So let's bring production back to America. Not enough inventory. Here's the big thing. Instead of having the stockpile only give away masks when there's a pandemic, why not rotate stock? Well, you can't rotate stock without regularly flushing some of the stock out in order to bring new in. And that means they have to be able to get rid of it, so to speak, without a pandemic, which means they should be selling it. They could sell at market price to everybody else and just be a regular supplier. So if the supplier, so we fill the partners fill the stockpile, and then we rotate stock by selling some during normal times to the healthcare systems, and in bad times we get away for free. This is also another big thing. Many of you have heard about war drills, or you might see National Guard going down the road every quarter for their military drills. They're always practicing. No one's practicing here. So let's have drills. Let's have the suppliers, the stockpile, and the truckers all go through drills on some regular basis where they operate at max capacity, just like it was a pandemic. And they continually test the system, which allows us to learn. Because if they're continually testing the system, we can continually learn from the system and incorporate it into the next drill. So those are the gaps. And I have a graphic that I developed before I realized that I had to show it progressively. So it's just one big model, and I apologize for that up front. Here's the model. So there's a lot here to unpack. So let me lead you through it a little bit. First of all, up here, right here, we have everybody involved in the supply chain are part of a coalition that think and act. Then we have supplier partners. They're dedicated. We don't have to bid. They're picked up front to be supplier thinkers. And we have logistics thinkers. So we have all those guys in here, plus the guys from the healthcare systems. That's how it's structured. Next, we have a shorter supply chain because they're all in the US. And we have the stockpile flushing the system to allow enough capacity to run a drill, because it can't push inventory into a warehouse that's full. So we have to have them regularly sell, and then we run drills. And for 1 week, we produce everything like crazy, as fast as we need to do for a pandemic. And we ship it to the stockpile immediately, and they immediately ship it out. Or actually, I'm sorry, they're filling up the gap because they just flushed it. I apologize.
Right.
And they learn from it. And as they learn from it, over here, after they go through the system, they're learning what actually happened. What did we think would happen versus what actually happened? Plan versus actual. And then they identify improvements, and they incorporate these improvements into the next drill.
Right. So
from my perspective, in my lingo, this is PDCA, and your perspective is DMAIC. This is demonstrating how to do it in a continuous improvement fashion with learning. So that's the model.
Excellent, Beau. Well, Beau, thank you for sharing that. We're kind of pretty tight on time at this point. I'm trying to figure out, to breathe deep breath. How do we wrap this up? I think my observation is, it's a wonderful example of lean thinking applied to a large systems problem, right? So you got a big systems problem and applying some lean thinking to it. You can see little parts. I think the students will recognize this. The idea of running those little drills, making some hypothesis about what's going to happen, and then it either happens or it happens more, or it happens less. And you're going to, that's the learning effect that you're trying to engender sort of within the whole system. And if the system can learn to improve itself, that's lean to me.
Yeah. So what the subtlety here is, nothing's ever going to work right the first time. Not the way you want it to work. Regardless of what your project is trying to do, the first time you make a change is not going to be what you thought.
No.
It never is. So you give yourself the ability to learn from it and say, okay, that didn't work. How can I change it to make it work? Because I have something I have to hit, a performance target I have to hit. And that's where the continuous improvement goes, the learning piece.
Right, exactly. I think, the students this week, our lean movie was Kaizen Toast. And I've now sort of, seen that more times than I, care to admit. But, Bruce Hamilton, is always talking about Kaizen, small changes for the better, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just, having that PDA cycle work.
Yeah.
Well, Beau, I think we're going to have to call it quits at this
Okay.
point. I appreciate your coming on.